Hi, I'm Iman Oubou. I'm the founder and CEO of Swaay Media, which is a digital publication for women with entrepreneurial pursuits that focuses on elevating, spotlighting, and inspiring women that want to start their own businesses or women that just want to challenge the status quo.
Welcome to Innovator Tribe Outside the Bubble,
a show about bridging the gap between the inspiration of an idea to the creation of a product. What's good, Swaay? How you feeling?
Hey, I'm good, man. I've been doing a lot of traveling, and it feels good to be finally just back at home, settling in and getting back into the groove of things. How's everything on your end? How's the real estate thing going?
There's boxes everywhere. I'm still unpacking, but it's good. It's good. I'm like a regular face at Lowe's. All the employees at the Lowe's up the street from where I live know me, but I'm good. I can't complain. I really do feel blessed, and this is all about the positive energy for all the stress that brings along to home ownership. But yeah, that sums it up.
Cool, man. Well, I'm super excited. We have a very, very interesting guest in today's episode, Iman Oubou, the founder of Swaay Media and host of Entrepreneur in Vogue. She has a very, very interesting background.
I really appreciate this episode because it's right on the mark for what we like to highlight here at Innovator Tribe. Like, because she's a non-technical founder, and she's making she's having really huge success within the technology space as well, just from being a scientist, from winning pageants to having the podcast to now having Swaay Media. It's a lot of insights that highlight how you can be, totally outside of the bubble and have success within technology.
Yeah, as of late, she just recently raised about $500,000 in funding for her website, swaymedia.com. And she's definitely on the path to actually raising even more money. And not only that, actually was able to launch her website with over 300,000 visitors on the first day. That's huge.
That's real huge. And I know that all sounds like that's huge and that's exciting and that gives you that emotional response, but you have to also pay attention to the details within her story along the way, because that's what really, got me, excited about her journey, hearing her, give off the little hints about how she manages her day, how she builds a mentor advisory team around her to help her execute on her goals, and just how she sets out her to-do list. And those little details, like the devil's in the details is what they say. And you got to pay attention to that while you're also hearing some of her, huge accomplishments that she's making as well.
Yeah, in this episode, you're going to hear how she goes from a biomedical engineer to pageant contestant to pageant winner, Miss Colorado and Miss New York, to podcast host, to eventually launching sway.com. That's Swaay with 2 A's. Definitely go check it out. This is, probably one of the most interesting episodes because she literally lays out how she went about going from point A to point B in a matter of not only a couple months, but realistically a couple years, because she launched her podcast 2 years ago and she launched her website earlier this year.
And you know what? It's all about action and execution, and that's what it's all about. So I really get your pen and paper and get ready for some notes, because a lot of gems are going to be shared during the show.
Yeah, man. Let's go ahead and get into it.
But first, Swaay, you always do this. You try to get ahead of yourself. We gotta tell the people, if they're vibing with the show, to subscribe, man. We want you to subscribe, man.
I just get really excited because at the end of the day, the episode is so much information packed into this thing. But you're absolutely right. Please subscribe to the episode. Subscribe to the podcast, because we're going to be publishing new episodes every week, and you're going to be able to get those episodes directly to your phone, directly to your email, and get this really, really great information and hear these really, really great stories of entrepreneurs building their technology startups.
Yeah, man. So, with that, let's go ahead and get into it.
Let's do it. I came across your profile, reached out to your team, and we were able to finally get you on the show. And I got to say, I'm pretty excited because, from what I've, read and heard, you have been able to really build something great and unique that I think is definitely needed right now, especially for our generation. And not only that, but, I feel like you've been able to scale fairly quickly, considering, it seems like you're a one woman show. I'm pretty sure you have a team around you. But it seems like you're definitely the visionary behind this. So we definitely want to dig into that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve, but I really appreciate that. I did start off as a one woman show. But I think the more you want to scale, obviously, the bigger vision that I have required to bring the right people together to help me kind of advance this in the right way. And I have to be honest, I did not think that it would be this soon. I launched Swaay in November of 2016. And to me, in my head, I'm like, I'm not going to really hire anybody until probably the next year or so. I'm just going to take my time. It's not really going to grow that much in a couple of months. But then the day we launched, it was, I think we had over 300,000 people on the website because we had also an enormous support with some press. And that's when the overwhelming positive feedback in my email and just kind of people reaching out on social media or whatnot made me realize that I need to really bring the right editorial team and make sure our content is always on point. And then obviously hire as we go. And we just brought in social media team this week. And we're also working with a few agencies outsourcing some stuff and had to hire a tech team. So things really move a lot quicker than you think in the startup world, even though I really try to slow things down because I try to play the long-term goal versus like the short term. And a lot of people in the startup world try to grow really fast and then sometimes they fail faster. So it's been an interesting journey, but yeah.
We're going to dig into that story a little bit real soon. Before we dive further into that story, I wanted just to give our listeners like a heads up about why Toye and myself are so excited about the show and just give you just a little background about all your success and accomplishments. You have a diverse background from just your professional side within being a biochemistry and molecular biology, and then also having your master's in biomedical engineering as well too. I'm not in the medical field, so my pronunciation of 4 or 5 syllable words, I'm gonna let that to the experts like yourself. So I'll just say that for the record now. But also it's you went from like Miss Colorado and Miss New York to also the host of your podcast, Entrepreneurs in Vogue, and most recently the founder and CEO of Swaay Media. And so it's exciting to have somebody on your show with that diverse background, being featured in Fortune magazine, Bold TV, Inc. magazine recognized you as like the best, like one of the top 5 best podcasts for women entrepreneurs. So just painting a picture for our listeners of like this episode, there's a lot of gems for our listeners to take away and gain some good insights on how to build a business and take those steps, take those risks to launch their goals and pursue their vision. But before we jump into the interview, there's always one question that we like to ask all of our guests, and I'm gonna let Toye jump into that.
Yes, Iman. So our first question that we like to ask our guests, when you're getting ready for that investor pitch, or you're getting ready for a big meeting or a big presentation or a big interview, what hip hop song kind of gets you in the zone? And, it doesn't necessarily, have to be hip hop.
That's an interesting question. I never got that question before, but I'm not a hip hop person, so I'm sorry to disappoint, but I listen mostly to house music. And honestly, every morning before I leave the house, whether I have a really busy day or a big, meeting or any just regular day, I definitely listen to like a selection of house music that I put together. I dance because I know it sounds weird, but it just makes me like more pumped for the day. It's like either I work out or actually just dance in my living room. But in terms of the actual song, I'm a big Tiesto fan, so I actually have a whole like I think it's like almost 2 hour mix of Tiesto song called Club Life. It's
Okay.
486 hours of
Wow.
basically all put together in one mix. And so that way
Wow.
for me, I'm not just listening to one song. It just kind of, transitions into a mix of amazing songs that I loved over the years. And that just gets me in the right zone. That's how I focus. That's how I turn off the world and the background noise. And that's how I kind of get into the mindset that I'm pumped, I'm ready, and I feel great. I feel strong mentally, physically. And then I get out the door and I take over the world.
That would do it.
That's what's up. So you said 486 hours. Was that a mix that you created, like yourself, the
No, I
486 hours?
wish. I'm not a DJ, but
I'm
I
like,
definitely Google
do you
those.
have like a side job too that you?
No, because I couldn't decide which song I wanted to listen to. And I'm like, you know what? He's got so many albums. I've been a fan since college. It just also reminds me of my college days. It's just a mix of like good house, trance, but it's not like too techno. So it's like the perfect songs that he puts out. And the vocals are amazing. So it just gets me, going.
So Iman, you have a lot juggling on your plate right now. I just even just with getting you here on the episode today, I remember Seema sent an introduction, one of our earlier guests, and connected us. And from that time, we learned about your going through some raising money for Swaay Media for some funding, and also still continuing with your podcast and just a whole platform that you have around your media company. So there's a lot on your plate. You have a hectic schedule. How are you? What's coming up or some things that may be coming up in the future that our listeners maybe keep their ear out to listen for?
So there's a lot of things that we're trying to roll out now that we have gotten to a good stage of growth, and we're trying to amplify that. So a few things include video content, which I'm sure is the biggest thing right now. So we're trying to produce more video content in a short format for social media, as well as becoming a digital distributor for a lot of web series that we're talking to now that actually going to end up on Netflix, but we'll be the digital publisher for those. So a lot of video content, long and short format. We are trying to roll out a forum as well on the platform where women can actually, subscribe. And if you have any business related question, any career question, mindset, self-development, everything that has to do with just becoming an ambitious and successful woman, there's going to be different chat rooms there where women can actually discuss all of this. So it's almost like mini Facebook groups, but very much curated on the site, and even having discussions over some of our articles that spark that discussion, and you want to kind of do that in a private setting. That's what we're trying to create as well. And we're just going to be a little bit more active on social media. So definitely people that are listening and are interested to keep up with kind of the great content that we put out and the discussions we're having, the spotlights of women that are doing incredible things. Social media channels for us are going to be the main go-to for that. We haven't really been active in that aspect because we didn't have a social media team. And so we were just kind of doing the strict minimum. But now we're at the stage where obviously social media is the biggest way to amplify our message and get more of our voice out there. And so we've been perfecting the strategy for that. And we're going to hit the ground running on Monday.
It sounds like you definitely have a lot coming up with the application and the platform. And one thing I definitely wanted to touch on was, so you said that, right now, your social media team is essentially kind of, at 100% right now before you guys were kind of doing what you needed to do to at least, keep things moving. Well, how do you guys get from where you are today, right, to where you started, right? You started with the podcast. So maybe even taking a step back and, really understanding, where it all started, right? Because from my understanding, at least, it seemed like where you are today really started from you working and producing this podcast.
Yeah. So for the most part, it did. I did launch Entrepreneurs in Vogue about 2 years ago, April in 2015. And that was following my crowning as Miss New York. So at the time, I saw the opportunity of having even bigger voice than just a title and a crown. And I think also having the title, you need to have a platform that goes with your mission as a Miss New York. So for me, I picked like women empowerment and especially entrepreneurship. I decided literally the day after to launch this podcast. I had no idea what I was doing. I sought some mentorship here and there. I just read about it. And then I started reaching out to women to get them on the show and also have them share their story about how they were successful in business and specifically what challenges they overcame as a woman in the industry. To my surprise, it wasn't even at the time starting off really hard to find these women. And also it wasn't hard to get them to want to share their stories. And that's when I realized like there needs to be a platform even online, above and beyond the podcast, that had as a mission to spotlight these women and have them share their stories. And then that's what's going to really inspire the young generation to start businesses and be successful in the industry. So and it's funny because a lot of people thought at first that I was going to run out of women to interview, which I think is idiotic because there's going to be 1,200, I think 1,200 new businesses are started by women every single day. But I'm not going to lie, I did think that was going to be the case. I'm like, what if I don't have women to interview anymore? What if there's not enough to spotlight? Like, is there enough content to put around this? And now we are always booked on the podcast, I think 3 months ahead. And that's awesome. I guess that's really why I wanted to start Sways, because I loved what the podcast did. It had a huge impact. It grew quickly. And it was kind of a platform for these women to come in and be like, here's my story. And I don't think they've been able to do that as much. They do a lot of press, but when you go on like Today's Show, when you go on an interview with press, they don't really care about the full story. They come and ask you about your business numbers. You're like, okay, what is the news angle here? Who did you just partner up recently with so we can lead with that? It's not an interview that actually cares about your story the way I cared about their full story on the podcast. So the word kind of spread, and we've gotten a lot of people reaching out on a day-to-day basis like, hey, I would really love to share my story too because X, Y, and Z. And so following that, I launched a podcast blog, which was entrepreneursinvogue.com. And so I also started writing on the side, which was a complementary thing to the podcast episodes. So I would do kind of a brief summary of what the episode was, turn that into a feature. And then I also would write on the side some more articles of like things that I would learn during these podcast interviews. I also launched an ebook the first year I completed the podcast of all the exciting stories, insights, challenges, and advice that women gave on the podcast. And so I published that as well. And so again, it kind of just started growing, the concept at least. So because I saw this as also a bigger business opportunity, because at the time I had my full-time job up until last September, I saw that this was growing and there was potential that if I did this full time and took it seriously and brought the right people around it, that it could be the next Refinery 29, except in a lot smarter way. And it's very focused on business or whatnot. So that's when I decided in September to quit my job and rebrand. So Entrepreneurs in Vogue was great as a podcast name, but if I was going to create a media company on its own, I needed to actually have a name that was brandable. So we spent some time rebranding in last March, and we came up with the name Swaay. And I also had a small advisory board at the time leading me or guiding me to make the right decision prior to launching. And one of them was the founder of Swaay Media. So a lot of the branding and like domain purchases and all that stuff came from him, and he was a big help in that aspect. And so, yeah, and that's how really Swaay came about.
Well, that was I feel like you hit on like literally, every key aspect. But we definitely want to, kind of unpack that, right? Because, it's there's so much you talked about, going into the podcast, the day after you won. You talked about, actually then, repurposing some of that content to actually start, creating a blog, then actually, deciding or realizing that this brand and opportunity and market was, something that was really even much larger than what you initially anticipated, deciding to, kind of rebrand and create an application outside of that. That's definitely a lot, but we really, really, really want to dig into, what were those, initial key steps, right? So, you said after winning Miss New York, this is back in 2015, right? You decided that, what, I really want to, follow through with me actually, winning this thing and highlighting, something that I'm interested in, which is, entrepreneurship, and women empowerment. And you said the next day you decided to start a podcast. So once you made that decision, what were those steps to actually, start recording and start, finding people to talk to? Like, what were those steps?
Yeah. So the first step was research. So here I am in my little corporate cubicle at the time, listening to other podcasts, and I'm like, oh my God, I should start a podcast for women in business. Of course, I spent half of my day at my last job researching what that means. So I researched how
You
to
were
start.
working on your business while at work full
Yeah,
time?
for the most part, but I'm a fast worker, so I usually get all the things I need to do for work in the morning, and then like I take the afternoon just doing my thing. So that was a big help in starting my journey. But I researched, a few key points about starting a podcast. So like, what are the steps that you needed? Obviously, like to set up your own website, you needed to find a name, you need a logo, all that prep before to create the concept behind your podcast. So I worked, I think, for a month on my description of what the podcast is, the type of guests I'm looking for, the tagline if I needed one, the name. The name, it took a lot longer than I thought. And then kind of just researching what's out there that's similar to the concept. And then once I had the logo, so I reached out to people to help me with the logo. A friend of mine did it for me for free, which, by the way, I need to actually change it because it's been 2 years now and it's time to upgrade. But he did it for free. And then once I had all of those little elements together of what I wanted to create, I went and sought a mentor. So obviously, I'm sure you know John Lee Dumas, who's the king of podcasting, and he has a great mentor that he introduced me to that I worked with for a month, like one-on-one for a month, to set up my Libsyn to host my podcasts, to set up, all of this iTunes, how to distribute to iTunes, how to distribute to Stitcher and what the difference is, all of that stuff, which was not obviously clear to me at first. And then I got to work after that. But, I was always kind of learning the best ways to promote it, the best ways to have the guests as well be my advocate for the podcast and kind of leverage their following to get my message out there and get my concept out there. So there's always been that like at least 6 months of researching before I felt like I really got it down. And then again, there was a technical part of it. And I know we discussed this off air for a little bit. How do I, obviously, how do I record it? I'm not an engineer in audio sound. So how do I get the right sound check? How do I edit it the right way? How do I record my conversations with these women since they're not here with me? All that stuff really needed to be figured out. And I thought at first it was going to be a lot easier. Hey, just start a podcast and start talking. But there's a lot of those steps that needed to be figured out right before. And it took a couple of months to really get it down. But at least I had all the prep elements ready to go once the page was up. So I just kind of went. And then, of course, you have to book your guests ahead of time so that you don't find yourself without a content for 1 week. So I had to really find 10 guests that I would reach out to right away before I even launched launched a podcast, which was the hardest part, is it wasn't established. So why would someone want to agree to an interview with someone they don't know? And if you look up the podcast, it didn't exist yet. So having those 10 guests agree to do an interview before I even launched a podcast was probably the hardest part of it.
Yeah, that's the journey of, moving from having an idea to actually being an entrepreneur and setting the foundation for your business. And you just gotta seek out and start with that research, and then continue action and using that momentum for the next step and the next and next. You made a comment earlier that I really was something I wanted to go and dive into for this interview, is talking about, you mentioned how in past interviews, or reporters or interviewers, they don't really capture the full story or your specific story. And that's something that's very, very valuable for us for on Innovator Tribe, is capturing that full story as well. And I'm interested in exploring your entrepreneurial journey from how did that inspiration occur? From doing some listening to some of your past interviews, you mentioned about the family aspect of your parents. They had a successful business in Morocco, and they had to leave that behind and started move to the States, pursue the opportunity. And really, did that influence your entrepreneurial pursuits before you even had the idea for anything related to your businesses today?
I don't know that it directly did. I mean, my parents have always been this hardworking figure that, for me, specifically also my mom, I mean, my dad also was CEO of 2 companies back there, and he's really established himself in Morocco. And I think obviously that had a big impact on my brother and I. It's like, oh, our parents are very successful. We definitely want to grow up to be that. I didn't know if it was in the form of a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. At the time I just wanted to be like my parents, which was the word successful, but I didn't know what it really meant. My mom did have a chain of businesses that she owned in Morocco that she of course had to leave and sell so that they can move all of us to the US. So for me, because she's always been that role model that really exuded kind of beauty, style, but at the same time hustle and grind. That's really kind of how I grew up thinking about myself, is I wanted to be this woman that not only was seen as successful, but not so much, not so much stylish or fashionable or feminine. And then of course I didn't want to be just that feminine, stylish girl, but not so smart and business savvy. I really did want to be both. And I wanted to have the whole package, which a lot of women do, but sometimes they'll feel bad about saying, yeah, I want to be hot and I want to be smart, but in society and media specifically, it's those 2 things for women are mutually exclusive. You can't really be both, and you're usually put in buckets. For example, when I was Miss New York, people did not think I was a scientist or I was an engineer at all, because to them, they see this beautiful girl with a crown and a title, and they automatically say, oh, okay, she's probably a model and just kind of, she cares about her looks and that's it. She must not be very smart. And then the opposite, when you see someone who's hustling, or when for me too, right now running a business, I mean, I don't dress up every single day. I don't really walk around like I used to walk around as a Miss New York in red carpet. And sometimes people are like, oh, you were Miss New York? It's interesting. So, and that's kind of the stigma that really led me to launch a specific business. So going back to my parents have always encouraged me to embrace my whole self, not being only one side of myself. They always wanted me to be multidimensional. They raised me as an athlete, as a smart scientist, engineer, and then of course as a beauty queen, quote unquote, is I guess the word that they use now for pageant girls. So they never made me pick one side and stick to it. They're like, if you're interested in all, we're going to support you in all. So that's really the biggest influence my parents had versus growing up in an entrepreneurial family, because I don't even think I would label them that way. My dad ran huge companies, but it wasn't him who started it. And my mom had, of course, a line of small businesses in our local city, but it wasn't anything like startup type of environment that really made me think, hey, I'm going to grow up to be a startup founder or have my own company. But I think along the years when I graduated and I moved to New York and I started kind of reading about all these other founders and the challenges women face in the industry, that's what influenced me to launch this versus my childhood, I would say.
One thing that I definitely, find interesting about your story is, you talk, you obviously have a scientific background, master's degree in engineering, and you go into doing pageants, right? While you're still working full time. And then you go into podcasting, right? Because, while podcasting is, somewhat of an entrepreneurial endeavor, people are still trying to figure out that business model, right? So you go from being a podcast host to actually then creating a business around the vision and mission of the podcast, all, various just different things that you're doing. And, I think the biggest question is why, when you can easily just kind of, sit within one box, what is it in you that allows you to say, like, this is something that is interesting, and I'm going to try it and see what happens. And, obviously each thing that you've tried, you've been successful at, right? So, I think there's definitely something interesting in the fact that you're able to, see a goal and then decide that you're going to approach it, but then also, doing what you need to do to make sure that you are successful in those endeavors.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wasn't successful at everything I tried. I did try to launch 2 skincare businesses prior to this, and it didn't work out. So those failed after a few months. And the reasons for those are numerous, of course, partnering with the wrong people, not knowing the industry as well, and just kind of dive in head first and not doing my research. So those are my failures. And in terms of really what makes me want to do, I think if you believe in something so strongly that even if it fails, even if you lose everything, it doesn't matter. That's like really how I approach it. It's like, for me, I really was fed up with my corporate job. I was fed up with my prior career, because although I dreamt becoming, an engineer, a scientist in the medical field and curing cancer one day, it just at the time didn't feel like I was supposed to be there. It was not fulfilling. And it was more miserable for me to wake up every single day knowing I'm going to my little cubicle and just doing my robot work than like me being miserable because I'm broke. So for me, I'm like, I will quit this. Yes, I don't know where the money for me is going to come from to live, but I will be a lot happier. So that's how I think of it. It's just, is it worth it for you? And what's the worst case scenario? If the worst case scenario for you, you're okay with it and is not that big of a deal and you will move past it, you will find that strength in you to just go for it. And here's the thing, the more you talk, you're thinking about this or overthinking about this, the more you're going to talk yourself from following your dreams. I think everyone is so anal about trying to figure out the exact plan to become that millionaire or a successful business person or whatnot. But sometimes that plan doesn't unfold until you actually take the first 10 steps. When I quit, I literally quit on the spot, and I didn't even know I was going to actually launch Swaay. I just had a really heated argument with my supervisor because of the tremendous amount of micromanaging and really taken away from the beauty of why I even took that job. And, at the time I was like, you know what, this is not working. I'm going to leave. That's it. Like, I'm not even given my 2 weeks notice. I'm leaving now. It was the best thing I've ever done. I don't regret it, because now that was like almost 6 months ago, something like that. It was the best few months of my life, because I actually was forced to figure things out, like finally made that leap of faith to actually raise money for this concept, which I've been trying to do that for 2 years. And I've never had the guts to do so. But because I quit my job, I'm like, okay, now what? Like, I'm not going to go look for another job. This is it. This is the time to make things happen. This is the time to plan for my business so that I can live on my own terms and that I can actually feel fulfilled in the work that I do. So it's a lot of self-talk. I do have a lot of time to myself where I think about things and I write them down on my whiteboard in my room. When there's so many thoughts that go through your head on a day-to-day basis, that quiet time is really important because that's when you finally make the most important decisions. It's not by talking to other people. It's not by listening to other people. It's by having time to yourself to actually think through everything that you want to do and what it's going to make you feel satisfied about your life.
I just got inspired, just listening to your story right there. There's so many takeaways for our listeners. Like when you came to that defining moment of quitting your job, and you mentioned like how you've been trying to figure out the funding aspect for 2 years, but like after you quit, you had to accelerate that and really dig in and make some action items for it. So like for our listeners, when they reach that pivot point of their 100% all in on their business, how, like, what tips or advice can you share about prioritizing the decisions and action steps and roadmap?
So I think when someone pivots, they are trying to do everything at once because you're like, that's how I'm going to really speed up this growth and the launch of my company or this and that. I think it's really important to take it step by step, like literally step by step, meaning, okay, so you're trying to put together a website. For me, in my case, it was like, okay, I need obviously a design for what the platform is going to look like. So for a whole month, I think actually more, month and a half, all I was doing is design work and development. So I wasn't over here writing articles. I wasn't over there hiring people to write an article. I wasn't interviewing people. I was just working on design and development, because the more focused you are, the more efficient you will be. And it will clear your head. So you won't be overwhelmed, because a lot of people pivot and they're like, okay, that means I have to do this. I have to launch this. I have to raise money. I have to do that. I have to get a data analytics person. All that stuff makes you just want to sit down and do nothing. So the more focused you are, and you brought up a good point, like the roadmap. A roadmap is important. So let's say, for me, I'm like, okay, March is going to be all about design. I need to find the design of what the platform will look like. April is going to be about developing that design, bringing the right person to actually bring that into life. And that's not easy. That actually takes a lot more than a month sometimes. And then, okay, I got to actually now put together a list of contributors I need to reach out to first, just to have the content and that platform. Okay, so content's done. Next thing, all right, so now we got a plan to launch. I got to find the press people that will break the news. That way we can at least have people on the website the first day. That's the next step. So it's step by step. So you can, I have this thing on my desk right now that I got from my friend who's the founder of The Muse. And it breaks down your to-do list in 3 categories. The first one is one big thing. So for the week, you write your most big thing. What is it that you need to accomplish no matter what? No excuses. Then the second category is three medium things. So those things come after you've complete the first big thing. But it's 3 of them. So it's like 3 smaller tasks. Maybe there are 3 smaller tasks that you need to complete so that you can get the big thing done. And then the last part is 5 smaller things. And those are like your last, if you've completed everything else you need to do, you can start working on these. So I split my to-do list like that in business in general to grow the company, and my day-to-day as well. And it's very efficient, because that way you don't just have a huge to-do list and you don't know where to start from. That's prioritizing. So I think there's also a famous saying that says it's not the lack of ideas that kill startups, it's the lack of focus. So for me, the biggest thing to really achieve this, especially that I'm trying to build an empire and there's a lot of moving parts on a day-to-day basis, if you're not focused on the major thing that you need to be doing right now in order to get to the next step, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm gonna be taking away. I mean, I like the way you broke down that to-do list, especially when you're working on a startup, and I think it's called a startup because there's just a very limited amount of resources, right? That you're essentially trying to have a million things that you want to get done, but depending on how big the company is and what the media strategy is right now. You have to kind of pick one and try to execute on that. So I really like the way you broke it down, kind of like that big thing for the week. And then you said three smaller things, and then 5 smaller things. Is that how you broke it down?
Yeah, 1 big thing, 3 medium things, and 5 small things.
There you go. Of course, medium. I said small, then small.
Minor.
Yeah, and obviously it's been working. It's been working for you. And there was really something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs kind of get to the point, and you hit on it specifically earlier, was having that pivotal moment where you kind of have to decide. You have to decide between choosing between your passion and choosing comfort, right? And that moment for you was a few months ago, and when you made that decision, things started to scale even more at a much accelerated rate than it has over the last year or so that you have been, or last year or so since you left for your full-time job. One thing that is probably the biggest deterrent from people actually making that decision is fear, right? Fear of failing, fear of not being able to pay their bills. And that's not something that I feel like anybody can advise, like, oh, don't be scared because X, Y, and Z. Like, at the end of the day, people make the decision and you have to live with that decision. But my question to you, outside of the issues and pressure that you're dealing with at work, what was that that turning point for you where you decided, like, you know what, I'm like, was there something that happened? Was there like something that happened within the podcast? Like, what was it that you said, you know what, I think, going at it full time is going to get me where I want to be?
For the most part, it was really the feedback and positive reinforcement I got from a lot of my audience, a lot of the women that we've interviewed. And that just told me that, hey, I'm onto something. I mean, it didn't say 1,000% you're going to kill this in life, but I at least got some confidence from that, is that if you were doing it wrong, if this was something that wasn't going to be a big thing, then nobody's going to really give you that like positive reinforcement, positive feedback to say, hey, this is really important what you're doing. It's much needed. So that, like, those words, much needed, have been reoccurring. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe it is much needed. And who else is going to do this besides me? And the other thing is, I just knew that I will make it work no matter what. And that's really how I work. So having confidence in myself that I am the right person to take this on as a business and as a mission to help other women get their voices out there, because the current media landscape, to be honest, is not favorable for women that are doing amazing. For women in general, it's just, you have two sides of the media landscape, the lifestyle, fashion, and beauty, and then you have business, but most business publications are not made for women. And they weren't at the beginning. It was Forbes and Inc. and Fast Company was made at the time for your middle-aged white male executive. And there wasn't much change since then. They're not able to pivot as much. Although I do have to give them credit, they're doing a lot of coverage for women nowadays, which is good, but it's not enough, and it's not in the way that's going to actually bring change and get women's voices heard. And the other thing, I mean, I did not predict this either, because I definitely launched my platform before this happened, but the presidency, I think we have now, this couldn't have been a better time for me to have Swaay in the mix, because Women's March came right after we launched. This whole women movement, feminism being discussed more and more, the women empowerment side of things, female entrepreneurship. It's a really, really hot topic right now. And I mean, it's been, I think, for the past year. And that's another reason why I'm like, okay, so I studied the market, obviously. Is there a need for this? Clearly there was. Does this need, can it be scaled? I think it could be. It's a media company. I mean, content is everything. And we live in the age of digital information and in the information age. And content is king. And I was able to produce that. And I'm sure at the time, I'm like, I'm not the best at it, but I'm going to hire the best team too to keep producing this amazing content. And I'm going to keep directing it in the right way to make sure we don't steer too far off the mission. And I was also looking into the media landscape in terms of digital media startups, which was like the BuzzFeed, the Refinery 29, Bustle, all that stuff. And I'm like, let me see the kind of content these digital media companies have. And I was looking for the kind of content that I was trying to find before I launched Swaay, and none of them had this. So I really honed in on a very unique differentiator, which was the content, the quality of content we put out, the angles and the stories we covered, and then the mission of the digital media startup that I was launching, and the market and the need for this kind of media company. And all those three, after kind of looking closely into those main points, it occurred to me that this was going to work out. You know, it might have its down moments, which every startup does, but if I fight hard enough for this, it's going to come through. And that's how it really kind of played in my head. But of course, it wasn't this like perfectly articulated in my head. It was like all over the place. Yeah. But there was like snippets of all these thoughts that made me like, okay, just do it, just do it, just do it. That's all I heard. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
It's like, you like simply put, you do your customer research, you know, you learn about your customer, what they want. You also learn about what the market is already, you know, what the market is actually saying that they want. And then you just find a way to, you know, bridge your solution for, you know, that problem that your customers are having. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit, but it's still on track some. I know you're probably going to laugh at me when I say this, but like in the profound words of Drake, you seem to have gone from 0 to 100 real quick. And so like I want to understand, hey, like, but like, so within that time span, I'm sure, how does you ramp up a team to manage the scale of the growth for Swaay Media?
That's a discussion I have pretty much every single day. I couldn't, of course, do it alone. So for me, really the growth has been the focus on bringing the key players together to take this to the next level. I wasn't sitting in my, desk saying, okay, here's what I need to do now, like in the next month in terms of hacking or growth hacking by myself in order to get me to like the 2 million unique visitors. That's not how it works. But it is like, okay, so who can I hire or which company can I work with to take us to the next level? Which social media team should I bring on board? And what's that going to look like in terms of the structure? How many times should we post a day? What kind of posts do we focus on? Do we do more videos? What kind of platforms will help us to make these videos? And then who can I reach out to get on those platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So that for me as like a CEO, that's really where the growth is. I mean, I think of every move in the company, everything that I do on a day-to-day basis from a growth lens. Everything right now for us is growth. Anything that we do is going to lead to that. Anyone that we hire is going to take us to that level. So that's why it's been actually one of the hardest parts about growing is finding the right talent to help you grow. And especially that you're small and you have limited resources, obviously I'm not going to offer the same pay as, like if you go to Refinery 29 because they're much more established. But it's like, how do you find not only the greatest talent, but also the talent that is going to align with your mission and believe in you to come in and help you take your company to the next level because they believe in the mission and they believe in what you're doing. And that to them is much more important than saying, hey, I want like 150K a year versus like 80K a year, But obviously growing with a company that's a startup has a lot of perks too, because you have stock options in the beginning, et cetera, et cetera. So you just really need to find those people that are going to not try to argue with you on the current salary, but also understand that if they help you grow, they're going to really be at a much more advantage later on than going to work for a regular company right now. So for me, the growth really has been, like I said, talent and hiring and doing CEO stuff that I was not, I never thought that I would be doing this kind of stuff. I don't really understand growth hacking as much. When I first launched this, it was not about reaching like millions and millions of people. It was about reaching like the women that really believed in the content that I put out, women that were struggling in their day-to-day jobs, and just giving them that inspiration to quit and do what actually makes them happy, whether finding another job or starting their own company. But now a lot of the reasons why I started the company don't even play in my day-to-day anymore. I don't interview people as much as I used to. I don't write at all anymore. And all I do is basically meet with investors and read up on growth hacking, meeting with a bunch of agencies, hiring the right people. So now I'm doing a lot more business focused stuff that's obviously going to lead us to a bigger growth versus the day-to-day content production that I started off doing in the first place, which actually I enjoyed doing. So it's interesting how things kind of change and shift once you're in that growth mode, because most people start a business because they love doing that specific thing. But then as they start building a business around their passion, you start seeing that you do less and less and less of that and more of accounting, legal, investing, hiring, researching, business development, partnerships, all that stuff that you actually didn't have the experience doing, but you'll learn along the way.
Yeah, that's so many key points there, just about building the right team, and not only building the right team, but building with people that actually believe in the mission, who are a little bit more motivated, not just by how much money they're going to make, but motivated by the impact that the company can make. And that's such a key point, just because when you do have a small team that you're working on, what's going to make that that team member stay an extra hour or two to get something done. Sometimes it's not necessarily how much they're getting paid, but just the fact that they're passionate about the company and about the mission. So that's all very great points.
Yeah, absolutely.
Iman, so we usually try to end the interviews with what we like to call the gem round. And essentially the gem round is, we're just going to go through just a fire round of questions, and you can answer them however you see fit.
Okay.
So the first question of the gem round is, and you kind of touched on it a couple times earlier, but really being able to give our listeners some things that they can actually pull into their workflow. What top 3 tools would you have recommended to yourself when you first started working on your idea?
I would say Trello is one of them, which is a project management tool. Keeps you organized. Depending on whether or not you have a team to communicate with, Slack has been really now big in my life to make sure that communication is flowing, but not overwhelming to my email. And then the third one, I would say for social media stuff that I use a lot for growing our account on Instagram, is WordSwag. Because you actually can make your own, not memes, but like quotes and all that stuff. So pulling quotes from the women that I interview or whatnot, putting it together into a nice visual helps me grow, obviously, the Instagram channel. And so it's called WordSwag. It's an app which has changed my Instagram game.
Cool. So that next question that we always ask, that we like to ask, what do you do to keep sane?
Meditate. I'm not a great meditator. I don't know what I'm doing, but just knowing that I'm trying helps me out. And then the other thing is boxing.
Okay.
The opposite. So, you need something to like blow off the steam. Yeah.
Like the complete boxing and meditation, I think. But hey, it's all about balance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm definitely a fan of meditation. I think that helps with stress and focus as well. And at the end of the day, they call it a meditation practice for a reason, right? It's nothing that you're ever going to get perfect. You just have to keep practicing.
Yeah, and I'm not good at it.
That's why you got to practice. So the next question, I feel like there's, a variety of different ways you can probably go with this, but if you can just kind of maybe give us your favorite one. What is your favorite business book?
All right. I have to be honest. The one, even though it doesn't come across as a business book, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with Peter Voogd. And this is a book that changed everyone's lives who I gave it to. It's called 6 Months to 6 Figures. Oh. And I read this. I actually had the audiobook too that I listened to every morning on my commute. it is basically your guide to your wake-up call to everything. I mean, I know the title might make it seem like here's how you make 6 figures in 6 months, but I think the bottom line here is how do you become a better person, a better leader, a better business person, to really put yourself in a path of reaching your full potential. And it goes through your diets, your energy levels, a lot of great examples. I love Peter Voogd. He also has a podcast and does a lot of amazing interviews too. If you want to check, if anyone listening to wants that weekly kind of inspiration, he goes through a document that helps you look back in your week and see what you accomplished and what you need to accomplish next week. It's really amazing. Peter Voogd does it well. He's like my main content creator.
Okay. I'm definitely gonna make sure I definitely check out that book and look into Peter Voogd. Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
The last question that we asked during this round, during this section, what is something that you do not want an app to replace?
Sometimes I really want to just delete Facebook. If it wasn't very crucial to my business, I wouldn't have Facebook at all.
This has been such a great interview, and I feel like we were able to really get your story and really dive into the different facets of Iman Oubou, the businesswoman and the entrepreneur and the all around mogul, future mogul. The one thing I definitely can say, and I feel like everybody will say, is you're definitely the type of person who are able to go into any sort of challenge, figure out what needs to be done, getting the right people around you and executing, and there's no way that does not lead to success. So I'm definitely excited to be speaking with you and look forward to what's coming in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share my story with your audience. I appreciate it, and it was a wonderful conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely. And before we jump off, definitely share with our listeners a way to connect with you and learn more about Swaay Media. Yeah,
so I'm on all social media channels at Iman Oubou, IMANOUBOU, and then Swaay is also on all social media channels at Swaay Media. And that's with 2 A's. Swaay is with 2 A's. And you can also obviously read our content on www.swaay.com. And you can reach out through the website or tweet me, Instagram me, Facebook me. I'm always happy to connect with people that are like-minded, and I'm always happy to answer questions as well.
Cool. Well, we definitely appreciate you being on the show, and we'll share all of the links to a lot of the resources you mentioned on our show notes. Awesome. Thanks again for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Iman.